what's going on, guys? We're back. You guys thought that we were going to be going away. We were going to get eradicated by the coronavirus, but we'll think again because we're not going anywhere. As we've been saying so boldly on Instagram, Corona does not have shit on us. So even though, obviously, things have had to take a little bit of a change, what with everything that's been going on, I just wanted to start this off by saying, first off, welcome back to the Talkin TV podcast. And second off, we're not going anywhere. So, Chris, what's going on, dude?
Dude, not much, man. You know, I'm currently self-quarantined, but we're still getting the podcast done, so.
Yeah, you and me both. Freaking, oh, man. Like, I mean, like, just this thing, like, I feel kind of embarrassed that it's like we have to self-quarantine ourselves, considering how healthy we are. But it's just the thing that we got to do right now, you know?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm no expert, and every time I've turned on the news, whatever station it may be, I get a completely different story. So
yeah,
I'm just doing what I think is right. And that's if I was to give any advice as an unprofessional, untrained, uneducated person on the subject, just do what you think is right. And for me, that's just staying home and avoiding people just to not,
It's nerve-wracking. It's anxiety-inducing just watching the news. I mean, watching the news on a daily basis now is anxiety-inducing. But so I guess kind of to give a precursor, you know, of course, you know, I'm Dom. That's Chris. You guys should know us by now if you've been listening to us. We got to call each other because we're currently self-quarantined thanks to the corona. But again, not preventing us from getting you guys more content. And, so Chris, before we jump into the topic, I guess, do you want to let our audience know, like, what we're going to be doing in the next couple of weeks, considering that our entire schedule has just been completely abruptly shifted now because of all the movie cancellations?
Yeah, I mean, I'll let you tell them what we're going to be doing, but I can tell them what we're not going to be doing.
What's that?
Not going away anytime soon.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, so basically, like, we're just going to be doing these call-ins because, you know, Dom, take it away.
So what I'm thinking is that we'll at the very least be doing, I'm thinking some retro reviews, some older movie reviews. We'll definitely be doing a lot more with certain TV shows now that we are going to have a lot more time. We've also got some new ideas, including kind of tackling movie genres, certain directors. It was stuff that we were already kind of planning on doing, that we were planning on incorporating into the new schedule. But now that we've got all this extra time, we figured, hey, may as well do it now, right? That's what everyone else is going to do in order to survive. So let's continue with that strong train.
Yeah, exactly. And like we're going to be doing pretty much like everything we're going to be that's coming down the pipeline in a few weeks is just like a little bit sooner than we thought because now like Mulan's been postponed and James Bond's been postponed. You guys know, you've seen it.
Quiet Place has been postponed. You guys get the gist.
You guys get the gist, but you know, there is something that I think that thankfully didn't get rescheduled or anything and that we get to talk about today, and it's such a saving grace because last night's episode was so dynamite, especially for like a season premiere. Dom, what are we talking about today on the podcast?
We are talking about the third season premiere for Westworld on HBO. So,
oh hell yeah, we are. Dom, why don't you, before we even jump into it, because this was like a longer break in between seasons than I think people are used to. First off, especially with like Netflix giving you one season a year of every show, like training us almost, and you know Hulu follows suit with that, and Amazon. So like this is, I kind of forgot a little bit, but it came back pretty quickly. So why don't you just like sort of like, are you cool with giving us like a little summary and then like of where we were, and then like maybe a quick summary of where we are right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So Westworld, again, like it's not even just a thing of where like when Netflix and Amazon has a precondition, TV in general has this precondition where unless there's extenuating circumstances going on, usually the next and latest season of the TV show always comes back after the first one. And in this case, Westworld obviously is conceived as kind of like Jurassic Park meets Blade Runner in the sense of it's based off of a 1973 film that was itself an adaptation of that was directed and written by the author of Jurassic Park, Michael Crichton, in which regular people can kind of go to this amusement park with these androids that are designed to look like cowboys. And you can basically go to this amusement park that will embed you in the Wild West and basically let you live out your wildest fantasies. Only in this case, considering that this series is co-created by J.J. Abrams and Christopher Nolan's brother, Jonathan, of course we're going to be dealing with artificial intelligence that wakes up and wants to kill people. And that is exactly the premise of the first season. And the setup for that is that the androids are slowly developing more of an artificial consciousness, and that at the end of the first season, it is discovered that the creator of the park, Robert Ford, portrayed by Anthony Hopkins, actually end up embedding a program in them that would allow them to wake up and rebel against the park residents. And that was the entire premise of season 2. And at the end of season 2, the leader of the robots, that being Dolores Abernathy, portrayed by Evan Rachel Wood, was successfully able to escape along with 2 other residents, that being Bernard Lowe, portrayed by Jeffrey Wright, and Charlotte Hale, or in this case, Charlotte's robot double that she created, portrayed by Tessa Thompson. And now, in this 3rd season premiere, we are finally seeing something that the first 2 seasons of Westworld have been building up to for a while now, that being the actual real human world. And even though this episode was kind of more of like a precursor and kind of like a window inside of that, without actually kind of getting us into the story quite yet, we definitely know that we're in for a massive showdown on all fronts.
Yeah, so I think just to jump in off that, see, you brought up Blade Runner, and I feel like the only real Blade Runner vibes I got out of the first 2 seasons were just the fact that, like, machines are waking up and realizing things. And it's not even like that's, like, necessarily a Blade Runner vibe. That's sort of just, like, not a trope, but it's like a sci-fi. You see that type of thing in sci-fi. Like, if you look at, like, iRobot and stuff, and, like, that happens in sci-fi. But I think in this episode, I actually got Blade Runner vibes as far as the establishing shots went and sort of the pacing and just the overall tone. It felt like it was really embracing that Blade Runner-esque type of sci-fi. And I'm actually pretty glad that, at least in my opinion, they didn't lean into it too heavily until now, until we've established this show has its own unique tone. And I'm glad that it didn't borrow too much from Blade Runner until now, because I think that almost would have been detrimental to sort of the trajectory and like the way that this show is perceived by people.
For my money, again, like my immediate thoughts after watching this episode was, wow, okay, so we are once again on a wildly different train than we were for the first 2 seasons. You know, with the whole thing with the first 2 seasons, it was very slow and deliberate build up and storytelling. Like there was almost little to no action until there was, and it would just like go crazy insane. And this episode automatically, like just from the opening shot, like it's a lot more fast paced. It's a lot more movie-esque, you know? And I thought the visuals were absolutely gorgeous and completely engrossing. But you're right. I kind of like how we almost get kind of like that neo-futuristic feel and tone. You know, you got the synth underlying music, Ramin Djawadi's score underlying the entire time now. It's not in the background. It is full on present. And I thought this episode did a really good job of that.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like, and I think that it's sort of the perfect time to give us this, as now we're getting a new setting. The tone sort of has to change a little bit because we're not just in, you know, Westworld anymore. We're in the real world and we're watching Dolores sort of try and ruin everything that you and I know and love. But the thing about it is, though, like, while they did mix in those new textures, like, I don't know if you noticed when we see Aaron Paul's character and he's like sort of walking on the street and it's daytime and he's walking to his construction job, like they had that establishing shot where they're on like that walkway terrace over the city, and I sort of paused that shot and I wanted to look around because that was when I thought like Blade Runner vibes, and I was like, okay, let me just see like what's going on in the background. And you have like people doing like sort of like a kung fu or tai chi type thing off to the left, like in this like garden. But you know what I really liked about it, man? That it was like, it was daylight. They weren't afraid to show a futuristic sci-fi world in daylight. There wasn't super pink and purpley neons and stuff. It felt like Blade Runner in the way that it was like set and the tone there, but it had its own unique like sort of like chromey quality, which I like about Westworld. It's got like this weird chrome energy that I haven't seen too much in sci-fi, and I know that's more of like a color thing, but it honestly does change the way I like see this show and don't categorize it in with like the shows that have come before it, like you know, like Blade Runner and like iRobot come to mind with this type of like android like robots waking up thing. But it stands on its own legs, I think, just with like small little touches like that, let alone how I want to get into dynamic this show already is becoming in just this first episode alone, you know?
Part of the reason why I enjoyed the aesthetic of the show so much previously is because they did a really good job of kind of blending like the rugged feel of the West, you know, like obviously it felt like kind of like a cleaner version of Deadwood, basically, which is another very popular HBO show that they did in the early to mid 2000s. But you know, obviously much more crisp and clean. You can tell the difference between like kind of early on digital versus now digital filmmaking. But with now, we're no longer in the parks. We are fully into the futuristic world. And that we're kind of in the other sect of what was in the first 2 seasons, which was where whenever we saw like the interior offices, like I said, they had that beautiful looking chrome, and it was able to add so much dimension and texture to it, kind of, and almost for like kind of having this like, for lack of a better word, bland and colorless backdrop. And I actually find that really interesting because it helps to illuminate some of the strongest themes that I think the show has going for, which is obviously that, you know, something that a lot of sci-fi and android things like to play around with, you know, in Hollywood. I don't know if there's like a secret subsect of Hollywood that's obsessed with this, which is the idea of the idea that these machines that we've made are more human than human beings themselves, you know? Like, I think back to a great
funny
moment.
Thought. Could you imagine?
I think back to that first scene when they first introduced Tessa Thompson in the first season, and she's just sleeping with the Rodrigo Santoro android, Hector. And it may as well, like, be a slave to her, you know? And it's like, but you get to know these androids so much as characters that it's like, holy shit, like, that's kind of not cool, you know? And then you especially see that in season 2 with the Simon Quarterman character, Lee Sizemore, I'm pretty sure is his name, when at the end of that season, he actually goes out and sacrifices himself for the androids. You know, it's like these androids are, to me, more relatable and personable than real people, which is, again, to me, part of the charm of the show, and also why I kind of always hated how so many critics are just willing to write off as like, oh, it's every basic sci-fi trope that you've seen when it comes to androids and artificial intelligence with no actual substance to it. You know, it's just putting it up for more mindless killing and action. And I'm like, no, I don't think that's the case.
Exactly, man. And, you know, so basically, speaking of like how these androids feel, right? That, like, Bernard, I was honestly baffled at that reveal when we found out he was actually like one of like the robots, androids, whatever you'd call them, of the Westworld city. Because like the thing that I think that Westworld does so well that we've seen, like, and I thank shows like that come, or movies that and shows that come before this, like for example Blade Runner, because I think like they were so real in that movie, but like they did still feel, once you found out, like, oh, okay, so she's an android, then you knew that she was an android. Like, she never felt like a human again. But the thing about Westworld, what they do is, it's like, it almost makes you second guess, like, is Dolores actually really an android, or is she human? But wait, she is an android because I saw her get cut open and I saw her insides. But it's like there's just, they feel so real. And also I think that kind of goes along with like the visual look of the show, the fact that there's, you know, the fact that it's not just super sci-fi. Like the real world does sort of look like downtown New York City, but you do have like, you know, some different looking cars, but then the slight nuances I think sort of help, especially where this arc is going in this third season, you know, as like they're in the real world, so it's like who's going to be friend or foe. I predict seeing that a lot. And I'm just like, really, I like the little things in this show really make the bigger picture even stronger. And I think, yes, they do that in pretty much most movies and films, but I haven't seen something accent the main plot as much as like these nuances in a long time, in my opinion, at least in television.
And just talking about the setting even more real quick of the city, like they're in downtown, it's called Neo Los Angeles, but like some of the settings and the backdrops and like some of like the architecture, it's almost kind of Black Mirror-esque in the sense of where I can foresee this stuff happening like tomorrow, you know, like there were certain like architectural designs that reminded me of like the Oculus in New York City, and like kind of like how the helicopters and the mini transports have basically become like the equivalent of large-sized drones, you know, just like it's kind of everything that we've been waiting to see with the first 2 seasons, with how they were hinting at the growth and expansion of the human world, you know, and that's before we even get into the characters and what they've done with it. But just bringing it back to Dolores and Evan Rachel Wood, the thing that kind of always set her apart, her performance specifically from the other androids, and why I have to give credit to all the actors portraying those androids, is how within a second, I'm talking like a millisecond here, they have to go from like being super emotional and like into character, you know, portraying these overly bombastic characters, to just shutting down and playing limp like within a second. Like it's actually really funny because I saw Evan Rachel Wood doing this on like a talk show or whatever, kind of basically explaining like how like she goes through the motions, like how she gets herself in the mindset acting wise. Like she has to hyperventilate super quickly when she's like in fear and distress, and then just immediately shut all that off and go dead. It's like it really does require a new level of acting itself.
Yeah, it certainly feels like a masterclass, because the thing about it is, it's like, at first, to be honest with you, man, I was a little off put by this show, and not because I understood what they were going for, but at first it felt a little cheap in those first few episodes, to be completely honest with you, because I remember the hype train was super real. This sort of show has always been right up my alley, and I wasn't too into it at first, but I'm really glad I stuck with it, because then you sort of realize how like there's no other way to play that. Like if you want to play these characters at their apex, at their peak performance, well, they're essentially, like you said earlier in the conversation, like they're slaves to Westworld, and so they need to be able to give their masters whatever they want. And so it needs to either be sometimes extreme fear, extreme sadness, but it's always like an extreme portrayal of the emotion, because horrible shit is being done to them. So like the fact that, like you said, she's able to switch between those so quickly, I guess it also was a little scary at first too, because it's so robotic. And now that I'm used to it, I can see the art in it. But yeah, at first it was like a little off-putting, and also I think because it was a little terrifying, just how good of a performance that all of these actors give, really, let alone the one you referenced in regards to being androids.
Yeah, it's definitely a little bit. Yeah, it's definitely off-putting, and I'm actually glad because like the whole thing is, I remember when this show first came out. I think that was actually when we first met at Duchess. Like I want to say like when that show started, it was like our first semester. Both when we first met, and I remember telling you about the show, and the whole big thing too, and I think the reason why it's also turned so many people off is because when that show came out, Game of Thrones had just wrapped up in 6 seasons, so people knew it was ending, and HBO was kind of looking for like their new crown flagship show, Now granted, obviously things were a lot different in 2016 than they are now within the television landscape. Obviously, the idea of a flagship show is kind of all but extinct, because there is no one big huge property that people are going to gravitate towards. That's why HBO commissioned like 7 or 8 new shows just in these past 2 years, because they know that in order to kind of, and it sucks we have to say this, but in order to kind of compete and survive, they can't just put all their chips and dogs in one basket. They have to kind of branch it out and lean into their multiple pieces of marketing. But so I guess the fact that they have not only decided to stick with this show, even as the reviews for subsequent seasons and episodes have gotten worse and worse, you can say, and the fact that they're still willing to give this much of a shot, I guess is something that I'm willing to give them credit for. And it's one of the reasons why I've always had the most amount of respect for HBO and why they're my absolute favorite television channel to watch.
Yeah, so I'm just curious because, to be completely honest with you, Dom, this was the first episode where I was really in love with it off the bat. Now, I'm like no stranger to sci-fi. Like Blade Runner is one of my favorite movies of all time. I grew up on the Terminators, the Predators. I've seen all the Star Wars countless times, and maybe that's a little more mainstream sci-fi, but I'm also deep into Altered Carbon. I've read comics like East of West and all this stuff, Saga. So it's like I can pretty much take in any medium of sci-fi and sort of, if it's good, I'll enjoy it and I'll find something from it. And it took me a long time to really figure out why I like this show. And that came with watching the first and second seasons twice each, because it wasn't until my second watch where I was like, wow, this was a lot to take in the first time around. And I'm just curious, how the reception of it is with the mass audience. I know you have more of your finger on the pulse with that, because if it's me, someone like me who's actively trying to find the good and find something strong in a show and find its strengths and weaknesses, obviously I'm going to watch regardless as a critic, as someone who just enjoys cinema and film to a high level. But if that was off-putting for me, someone who's actively critiquing this, how has the reception been for mass audiences? Do you know that?
I think the trouble for it comes from the fact that, okay, what kind of did you expect that it was going to be, And it's another one of the reasons where it's like, okay, it's not that I find that the criticisms to not make sense, but it's like, it's a hard pitch to sell, because it's like, it's a Western, but it's also a sci-fi about androids, but it's also an amusement park, It's like, it's a tricky thing to sell to people, because they're expecting something along the lines, like I said, of a Jurassic Park, and when they're expecting a lot of action, but there's barely any action in the first season, because they're waiting and they're holding it to the second season. If you think about it, the storytelling itself is actually really brilliant, but kind of for a mainstream audience who kind of are expecting a Game of Thrones, where it's like certain pulse-pounding action and quick-witted dialogue kind of every new minute, versus this, it's something, it's very slow, it's very, very deliberate. They're playing around with a lot of heavy ideas, with sci-fi and kind of artificial intelligence and, what it means to be human and the Turing test and all that shit, all the stuff that I talked about loving about stuff like Ex Machina and stuff like that, but I can definitely see how it can kind of be a little bit of a slow burn, and why certain people might find this hollow and not very interesting. But to me, at least, again, everything that I get from this, I love it. I see every single season as a natural progression of what comes next, and that's why I couldn't be more thrilled for what's going to happen. Like I said, if anything, the only critiques that I would have had towards this episode is there were certain parts where the production and the editing felt a little bit rushed, almost in not quite a natural way, but I was so engrossed by it that those things, again, it's minor nitpicks to me.
Yeah, but it didn't seem hollow to me. More so, it just felt like a sensory overload. It felt like this show was trying to offer so much and dive into so much and unpack so much that it was just a lot, because so much about it is stunning and so much about it can easily just rely on the things you see at face value, the beautiful people first and foremost, the beautiful setting, the the you know, the CG is just so smooth and it just fits the world so nicely, and you don't get too much of it, which I think is awesome in the first few seasons, but when you do, it completely blows like even like the biggest movies. It's like it's competing with those kind of guys, and let alone like the performances, like Ed Harris in the first season just to be a standout right there. Like there's so much at face value that you're like, wow, this is like a lot, but then there's like this other level of the park, like let's call it like underground the park, and there's all these inner workings, and when we go to like their laboratory, it's just like, oh man, but I'm still so engrossed with these Western storylines. Now I have to handle all this, and they're exploring that. It felt like a system overload at first. So when you started off that last little segment of yours, you said something about like problem, and you think the problem people have at most of this show. So like, do you think that like maybe the problem was for maybe like a more like, you know, mainstream audience, or people who like sci-fi but did not expect this show to get this deep? Were they just trying to do too much? Do you think it's sort of like that sort of situation in the first season, or what's your take on all that? Because now, before I let you go, it doesn't seem very overwhelming at all, but that's because I think we had like these first two seasons. The first two seasons to me, now that I got this first season of the third episode, it almost felt like a setup for like where the show is actually going to go, you know, but it's a long setup, you know what I'm trying to say?
Definitely. It is a very long setup, but again, I think that's also because if I'm being honest, I think the show was course corrected a decent amount. I think that they were originally going to spend a little bit more time in the park, and especially once you catch up with, you know, a fan favorite character, you know, May, portrayed by Thandie Newton, who was missing for most of this episode and ended up returning at a post-credit scene. I feel so bad. This poor host cannot escape the freaking park. She's been trying to do it for 2 seasons now, and she still hasn't been able to do it. Yeah, like the idea of kind of why people find it slow. I think that, again, it was definitely a situation where the show was trying to really find its identity and what it was really about. Because honestly, with how good that first season was, because to me, the first season is still like the magnum opus, I feel like the fact that like it did have future seasons and they were able to kind of expand upon and go in future ideas and directions, you know, in order to kind of pursue it. It feels like, and also I think the 2-year gap in between each season has a lot to do with that, obviously because of like the advanced production and the amount of visual effects that go into this show. You know, obviously it takes a much longer time with production. So I think that's also why, because it's never always at the forefront, and it's never really like, it's not the show that like everyone is like saying, oh, I can't wait for Westworld to come back, you know? It's more of like kind of falling into niche territory, but I kind of like that. And because it helps kind of allow the show to go in different and more unique directions that I think it wouldn't have been able to do if it was a more mainstream show, you know? And to me, at least, I think the other thing too that helps just make this episode much more direct, much less characters. Much less characters. The first 2 seasons, you had kind of the typical HBO cast of like 20 or so characters that you were following, and with the amount of storylines and with how dense each season was, it definitely became a little bit, you know, a lot to remember, especially once they introduced like that there were multiple they kind of pulled a Witcher, where there were multiple timelines going on that you weren't even aware of in both seasons. But now, this season, it seems to be a lot more direct. There's much less characters. I think returning from the previous season, we only saw 3 returning characters in this new season. We know that 2 more are coming. We know that Maeve is coming back. We know the Man in Black is coming back. We know Stubbs is coming back. And then it was just Aaron Paul, and like that was it. So I think that helps keep it a lot more focused and direct, and kind of it felt, put it this way, if this makes any sense. The first 2 seasons felt like typical HBO seasons. This episode felt like, you know, the beginning of a movie.
Well, let me be honest with you. This episode was the first episode where I was really impressed. And so I'm glad that we watched it last night, and now we're recording it the morning of the day after. I'm glad that I sort of had a chance to dissect and take it all in, because I was originally of the school of thought, like my initial impression was this was the first episode of the show that I really loved. And then that's not true. I think that you needed those first 2 seasons to get to where we are. I do think that, you know, it could have been done maybe a little more direct way, a little bit of different way. But again, I don't like to speculate on that because I'm not the creator of this, and I wouldn't want anyone to like poke or prod or herd my creation in any direction. But for me as a viewer, as someone who like likes these type of sci-fi worlds, this is the first episode where I was like, oh shit, like I actually can't wait for next week's episode now. I never really felt like that about Westworld before. I was watching it. It wasn't terrible. I mean, I liked the show. It was definitely not in like my top favorite shows of all time, but it certainly wasn't in my least hated, right? It's always been in that middle territory. But now there's a chance for it, I think, to break into that like, wow, this might go down as like something that really impacts me, because I just felt locked in. But again, it's like, I think we needed those first 2 seasons, as diverse and as convoluted as they may have been at times, with, like you said, the amount of characters in those first 2 seasons, the amount of storylines they were balancing. Like, they did a great job with it, but I think like, yeah, this feels way more centered and way more focused, and also also just way more gripping in one episode than it ever has in the first 2 seasons alone, to me right now at least.
Yeah, definitely. And so if we want to shift gears here, I kind of want to talk about maybe speculate, like kind of, obviously what the setup for the story is, what they're trying to go for now with this season, and kind of the new directions that they're going to kind of pull them in. So obviously, it looks like Dolores is continuing through with her plan to kind of slowly and suddenly take over humanity, for lack of a better word. Obviously, that's no small feat. There's like 1.5 billion people on the planet or whatever. So she's going to have to obviously do it slowly, step by step, one by one. But if we remember from the end of the previous season, she was successfully able to escape from the park by implanting her consciousness inside the Charlotte Hale duplicate, and along with the 5 other host membranes, kind of that contains their memories. She ended up rebuilding Arnold, or Bernard in this case, the duplicate of Robert Ford's partner Arnold. And then she also constructed a new body for both herself and Charlotte. We don't know the host that is currently occupying the Charlotte clone, though, but we know that the real Charlotte Hale is officially dead. And she's kind of trying to get access to this one young billionaire's son, who is the heir to this major tech conglomerate, played by John Gallagher Jr. And of course, her best laid plans are foiled when Chibs from Sons of Anarchy, Tommy Flanagan, tries to take her out and dispatch her, but she ends up managing to get the drop on him and all of them, and ends up replacing him with a host body. And I actually find that really cool because Tommy Flanagan, if I'm talking personally, is one of my favorite TV actors. I loved him on Sons of Anarchy. I've been waiting for him to get back into something huge. And then while all this is going on, you've got this one other storyline where you're following Aaron Paul, who's just this regular construction worker who also doubles as a veteran with PTSD. He's kind of your more traditional protagonist in the sense of where he's kind of the guy that you're following who, again, doesn't really fit in. He doesn't really like technology's grip on people and where that's going. And that I found really interesting. And obviously you can tell the episode is building them up on a trajectory where they're going to hit smack dab first and foremost. And so, Chris, I guess my question for you is, do you think that Aaron Paul's character, his name being Caleb, do you think is going to be a foil in whatever Dolores' plan ends up being? And also, could he potentially shift her thoughts on humanity? Because she's got a pretty dead set thought process on human beings, given her experience with them in the park.
Yeah, well, so I did think about this a lot, and I think that this is the reason why I just previously said that this felt like the most gripping episode of the show yet, and it's only like the premiere, like where this is why I say this feels like we're going to explore more interesting ground than we've gotten even in these first 2 seasons. But of course, we needed those first 2 seasons to get where I'm about to go, and so basically, yeah, Dom, I do think that this is going to be like, it's going to be interesting because, Aaron Paul, he's down on his luck, right? We're meeting him in a distressed state. It looks like his mother has this Alzheimer's type thing where she doesn't even recognize him, and he's pained by that. He lost one of his comrades in war, and so he's doing this therapy where like a close buddy of his, a fallen soldier of his, calls him up, but it's just an android, and he seems kind of like how I feel about Twitter, where I'm just like, damn, like, I have this and I have to use it to keep up with everyone, but like, what if I deleted it? It seems so freeing to delete it, and I want to get rid of it so badly, but right now I have it. But I'm not doing everything, right? Like, I'm not putting those little tablets in my mouth like everyone else is, aka TikTok. Like, I'm not on TikTok yet, but I still have Twitter, and I have the ability to use it, but like, I'm sick of it. And so he sort of seems so disheartened by machines, and so the fact that he runs into Dolores couldn't have been any more perfect, because that moment made me realize, like, yeah, he does some shady shit, but you know what? There's a woman in need right now, and he's going to help her because he is a stand-up guy. He's just hard-pressed, and his back's against the wall. So for me, it almost seems like this isn't going to be so much a choice from Aaron Paul, which is what I think they want you to believe. It really seems like it's going to be a choice from the Dolores character, where is her programming, is her hatred against humanity going to be able to see, like, well, there are some good people here, and maybe there is a way to coexist. Obviously, the Delos company, all those investors, like, she killed that guy right at the beginning of the episode, Jerry, his name was. Like, yeah. Obviously there's some real terrible people, and we got to get rid of those guys, at least in her mind. But like, is she going to be able to sort of show emotion outside of her programming? And I think that Aaron Paul's character isn't really going to be the one who is given the choice. It's almost like he's sort of like the tool, like the device to like see if we can, find some humanity in this machine. And if we go down that route, well, let me tell you, this will go down in history for me, because it's not that we haven't sort of seen that before, but the way that Westworld explores things and the way that Westworld can sort of like take a storyline we've seen before, but add just a whole new dynamic to it, nothing seems more interesting to me right now than that sort of those two characters finding themselves and watching this unfold.
Yeah, definitely. But I guess if anything, like I said, I did like this episode. I liked this episode a lot. Like, it was very, very engrossing. I couldn't take my eyes off it for 1 second. This was a long episode too. This wasn't like your typical hour-long fare. This is an hour clocked in, an hour 19. And so I guess, if anything, I want to levy like a worry that I might potentially have that is actually very similar to some of the problems that I had with Stranger Things Season 3, which, as you guys know, if you listen to our top 10 TV shows of 2019, it was a season of television that Chris loved a lot. I was not that big a fan of it. Yeah. I guess the thing is that Westworld, to me, one of the best things about the show is kind of it's foraying into gray territory. Like, kind of there were no really good or bad guys. The people were still people, and the androids were simply reacting to it. The androids were doing what the logical next step was, and the people, they were just being people. This is what they are told to do. You are told that you can go into the park and basically indulge in all your carnal wants and needs to your heart's desire. If that includes fucking a bunch of prostitutes, then go right ahead. If that includes killing a bunch of people, go right ahead. It's all fair and fun and game, And right. I guess my worry going into this third season is if they're going to kind of move away from that and go for a more traditional black and white exterior, which is robots good, humans bad. And then kind of the Aaron Paul character is just like kind of the intermediary in the middle, kind of the equivalent of the Chris Pine character from Wonder Woman, where he's kind of telling Dolores, oh, not all humans are bad. I don't think it's going to get that simplistic with kind of the explanation and everything. I do still think that he's going to kind of be the reminder of the gray area as Dolores moves and the rest of the characters move into more black and white territory. But it is definitely a thing that I feel like we do have to be skeptical of, where if Westworld is going for kind of a more traditional viewpoint in order to get more people, that could kind of have the potential to dumb down the source material and turn it into something that kind of takes away from what made the show special to begin with.
Yeah, so I want to sort of dip back to what you said about like 10 minutes ago, where you were talking about like this show has had some sort of like production difficulties. I think you worded it as.
Yeah.
Was that just you speculating, or was that something?
No, that's not speculation. That was confirmed. Like, the pilot was originally supposed to come out in 2015. I think they reshot it originally. Again, there's been 2 years in between each season because of the amount of production. Again, it's not necessarily production problems. It's just a matter of, again, the production is so vast. Like, you see all of those sweeping landscapes and all of the CG used in it. It's like, it's to me, again, it's the same thing I said about the last few seasons of Game of Thrones, where it's CG that is on par with, if not better than most CG that we've gotten in big budget movies over the last couple of years. So
I mean, I would say better. I would definitely say better. And so the reason I brought that up is because with that being said, obviously there is a return on investment that is present in anything creative, and it sucks, but you're not going to get your creative projects if your creators aren't making the studios funding this thing money. So with that being said, I mean, like you were saying, Dom, and I'm glad that you know so well how to do this, because you make my job easier right now. So basically you were talking about how like this hasn't really been like sort of like the breakout like that HBO probably expected. It's a little bit more culty. It's a little bit more off the beaten path, although it certainly the price tag is not off the beaten path. I think anyone can tell that. So is just your fear of, because I agree. And so I think that I'm not afraid of the same things as you're afraid of, although I'd be remiss if I didn't say that, yes, centralizing these storylines and making it sort of simplistic, androids good, humans bad, like that obviously crossed my mind. I think that with the amount of talent and with the way that Westworld explores things, like I said, I'm not worried about it, but certainly it seems like we've gotten to see a bigger world, but we're seeing a smaller, centralized, more focal story, more focal vision. So do you think that this sort of shift, because this was a tonal shift, like we said at the top of this podcast, do you think that kind of comes from like, okay, well, we're throwing a lot of money at this show and it's honestly had some problems. We need to start seeing some money back, guys. So do you think that that's the reason why you have some of your fear and all this type of stuff around the show?
I definitely think that's part of it. I definitely think that's a small part of it. But again, it's also just a matter of fact of, HBO, just if we're looking at the business side of things, it's just going in a new direction. Game of Thrones was just their flagship show for so many years, just ended. They unveiled a boatload of new content last year. I think they did like they introduced 6 or 7 brand new shows last year. You had 2 seasons of returning shows, obviously with Barry and Succession, which were both tremendous for them. I think both of those shows got more views than like anything that they were expecting previously, so they can kind of hang their hats on that. They still have, and that's the thing, that HBO still has niche programming, like that's been a thing since time immemorial. But now I think that kind of with their new shift in direction, it's 2 things. One, they're leaning into more of kind of situating certain productions at certain points. And I think they're also taking a new advantage of the fact that, okay, so they've got their new streaming service, HBO Max, set to come out this year, which is going to have like every Warner Brothers property, everything. The DC Universe app is going to get folded into that. But also, they're kind of doing more of a focus of a thing that I've been seeing a lot with both TV shows and miniseries, which is kind of taking the approach of just turning it into an extended long movie, which is kind of something that you and I discussed off the podcast, the idea of the real difference between television versus extended movies, and kind of how that's the direction that TV has been going in for the last couple of years now. Just if you want to look at the earliest examples, with the introduction of the anthology shows, I wouldn't go so far as American Horror Story. I would say much more so the first season of True Detective and Fargo, once those shows debut. But we've only been seeing it more and more recently, specifically with Netflix. If you just look at like a couple of years ago, like what Netflix was able to do with The Haunting of Hill House, or what Ryan Murphy was able to do with his other production besides American Horror Story, that being the American Crime Story, with the first season obviously covering the O.J. Simpson trial, I think in a much better way than you ever would have gotten if you'd gotten that as a movie. And then with the second season following Andrew Cunanan, who of course was famous for murdering Gianni Versace, a subject area that was of course much more in Ryan Murphy's wheelhouse. But you kind of see what I mean with 100%. Kind of going for the idea of the extended movie, the 8 or 10 episode movie, as opposed to like a season of a TV show, And I think that's something that they're starting to fold into their traditional television programming as well, not just their miniseries.
Yeah, so there's 2 things I want to say to that point. I think that you kind of need that sort of style, that sort of approach for something that needs so much unpacking, like a Westworld, or like the American Crime Story sort of stories, right? Like those are just crazy drawn out legal battles with like depth and background and discoveries and uncoveries, and you to have that done in 2 hours might be a disservice to the story. So I think you need that. But like, do you think that Westworld's going to suffer from this, or like coming from where it was, or do you think that audiences like us just need to sort of embrace this tonal shift, and it's sort of justified maybe because we are in a new setting, we're in the real world now, we're out of Westworld? Like, what's your take on all that?
I think, the setting will come, just with the storytelling. I've said this before, time and time again. If the storytelling is good, then I'm down with it no matter what. But I definitely do think that it is a situation where, again, I also think audiences are gonna kind of, the audiences adjust quickly, like usually like it takes a lot now for audiences to kind of go along with like a total shift. It's not like back in the day where kind of, for example, like the difference between The Wire season 1 and 2 and why so many people were turned off by The Wire season 2. Now I think that it's a lot easier for people to kind of get on board when the show kind of like does a course correction, for lack of a better word, simply because, again, there's so much content now. You see shows doing that like much more often, So that's one thing. And also the other thing is, I've talked about this before, kind of like the differences between extended movies versus television, which is where I love extended movies. I love a good miniseries, like a nice contained story, a beginning, middle, and end. But at the same time, I also feel like that kind of takes away from the charm of why people love television to begin with, which is kind of, you could get these amazing stories that go on for years and years and years sometimes. Now, I get it. Obviously, if you do a story that goes on for that long and you don't have a plan for it, which most of the time these extended TV series don't, cough, How I Met Your Mother. But when you get that, you have a tendency to obviously to overstay your welcome. Things get repetitive. The storytelling doesn't feel as fresh. You don't like the characters as much. Now, obviously there was always that sense where, TV, again, it's not supposed to be the equivalent of feature film. It's comfort food. There's not as much production put into it. You turn it on just to decompress with like your favorite batch of characters and then not think about it at all. But obviously, you and I both know now that after having lived through 2 decades of, I think, the most revolutionary that as it has ever been for the television medium, we've said this time and time before that television is now doing better stories than most movies are now, and I guess what I'm trying to get at is that I don't want the massive amount of content now that is erupted as a result of streaming to kind of take away from the good stories that we're still able to get on television. And so while I don't think that the extended movie approach is bad necessarily, I also think that kind of leaning on that too much, again, is going to take away from some of the more rich and interesting story prospects, you know? Like, take Lost, for example, you know, your favorite show. Like, Lost is great. You know, and it was completely revolutionary at the time, say which will about the final couple seasons. But
yeah.
I feel like if you take that and kind of turn that into an extended micro movie, it kind of takes away from what made that show, you know, as revolutionary as it was to begin with. You know, like the kind of the TV prospects help make Lost what it is.
Yes, 100%. And so, you know, like, I think it's sort of like one of those things where the creator needs to find what works for them. It's sort of like when an artist doesn't hit their stride till their third album, right? Like the first 2 records, they were maybe finding their feel, they were experimenting with these sort of instruments, they were sort of figuring it out. But now on their third album usually is when like an artist either makes it or breaks it, you know? You got to find what works for you. And I think like in any type of art form, there are trends that are set. I think like we're seeing the mini movie structure it's been really pushed early on in this past decade of ours with like Game of Thrones and like, you know, Breaking Bad sort of being in the later half, sort of like falling into that, in my opinion. And then if you have Stranger Things as well, I mean, Stranger Things out the gates has always felt like a smaller movie that they just, you know, wanted to cut up to tell more of that story. And it doesn't work for everything. In this case, though, I do think it does work for Westworld. But like you said, the only thing I'm not fearful of, but I'm being conscious of is like it could easily go down the very simplistic route of androids good, people bad. Do you feel the same way about that, or do you have a fear for that with Westworld?
No, 100%. That's pretty much exactly what my thought process is. And kind of to go back to that point real quick of television being expanded movies, you know, you mentioned Breaking Bad and Game of Thrones. I would go even as far before that, you know, with The Sopranos. You know, obviously, people have talked about obviously how cinematic that show is, but the reason why I feel kind of that is because like the idea behind the original first season, just the first season itself, was it was supposed to be a movie. You know, it was David Chase conceived the idea as a movie about, you know, a mobster in therapy because of his mom, and that would have made a really cool story idea. But kind of him taking it to Brad Gray and then decided to pitch it to HBO as a show, you know, especially at the time, you know, HBO only had one drama under their hands. It definitely like kind of there's a lot that goes into what makes a show kind of revolutionary, and I feel like people give a lot of credit to certain qualities of a show when mostly it's just luck and timing, you know, luck, timing, and certain new forms of technology that come around and make shooting different and accessible. But the other thing too that I feel that why I regard The Sopranos as being so revolutionary is because The Sopranos was able to adapt and change throughout you know, as time went on throughout the early 2000s. You know, you look at the last season of that show versus the first season, it's almost like you're watching 2 completely different shows almost. So that's, again, another one of the reasons why I'm kind of okay with Westworld going in this new direction, because again, we've seen shows have to shift and course correct over and over again, you know? And so if anything, I kind of like that they're going in a new direction because it's keeping the show fresh and it's keeping it interesting. I just don't want it to go down the road of it becoming a little bit too simplistic.
Yeah, no, I think I really have nothing more to say about that. I couldn't agree any more with pretty much everything that you just sort of said. And so with that being said, sort of talking about going down the road a little more, let's unpack one more part of this conversation here before we split ways, because there's something that, you know, we're talking a lot about this, and I kind of got to get your take on this. So the reduced cast. Does that worry you? How do you feel about sort of like, because we're talking about like the scope of the show, but like we lost a lot of good performances, you know?
Yeah, we did.
So how do you?
A lot.
Yeah.
Like
so
pretty much, no joke. Like the difference, like Chris has not lied. Like the difference between last season and this season is tremendous because like you pretty much take the main 5 characters, which of course were Evan Rachel Wood as Dolores, Sandy Newton as Maeve, Jeffrey Wright as Bernard, Ed Harris as the Man in Black, Tessa Thompson as Charlotte Hale, and then like a few other players, and like they basically gutted everybody else. Like Anthony Hopkins coming back last season was already a surprise enough because I thought he was done after they offed Ford at the end of the first season, but they kind of kept him around as like this artificial intelligence god for the last season. But it looks like for this season, Anthony Hopkins is officially done. Ford is completely gone and everything. And I'm interested because, again, the thing that I always like about HBO is how they're able to bring in so many new characters and manage to get you used to every single one of them, you know? Like if you look at something like The Wire had an immense sprawl of characters and they only added more like each and every single season. And somehow by the end of that last season, you managed to get to know each and every single one of them. And so it both worries me, but it also doesn't with this season because it allows them to clean house and kind of focus back on the characters that we've kind of been with. You know, it kind of gets rid of some of the excess characters that maybe weren't contributing as much to the cast. And it also allows for, again, another rich bevy of talent to be introduced because besides Aaron Paul, you had a shit ton of other people in this first episode alone. Yeah, Kid Cudi with the voiceover.
He was pretty good.
Yeah, Lena Waithe and Marshawn Lynch as kind of those two people that Aaron Paul teamed up with for like his little like heist thing. Yeah, the big black guy that was with him and Lena Waithe. That's Marshawn Lynch.
Yeah. No way, dude.
Yeah, dude.
Wow.
Yeah.
Westworld. Okay.
Yeah, they revealed. Again,
He's also one of my favorite football players. Side note.
Again, two of my favorite TV actors, John Gallagher Jr. and Tommy Flanagan.
Wow.
Who else?
I didn't pick up on it. I was just so shocked and awe of like how good this episode was. Yeah. I didn't even freaking notice one of my favorite football players. That's crazy.
Yeah, welcome back to Chris's football tangents.
Yeah, no, dude. I mean, that blows my mind, dude. A man of many talents. So yeah, Dom. Like, I'm sorry to cut you off there. That I get. Okay, so then I guess I'm not worried. Like, I posed the question to you, but I'm not worried because the fact that we have like a rapper.
Chris, here's the one football player who's in there, and he's automatically down. He's like, yes, I am totally in now. Yeah, but
so it is a little bit of a bias because that's one of my favorite teams. But listen, here's why I'm not worried. Okay, it's because you have a rapper in there. Yes, they act in their music videos, but that's completely different type of acting. And you have a football player, dude. And I didn't even know. Honestly, I didn't know it was Kid Cudi, and I didn't know it was Marshawn Lynch until you just said it. But I had to look up that it was Kid Cudi afterwards because I was like, is that him? No, it can't be because the acting was so good. Like this show, man. I mean, it has been faced with a lot of difficulties and like you thankfully know so much about the production. Like it has had its problems, but like whoever's directing these actors, I mean, I have no worries now. I have no worries at all. Like because these are novices at best in a show that has a chance, in my opinion, to go down as like something special in history. And so yeah, I mean, are you worried? Because I'm not. Now that you just said
I'm not worried at all. No, like I said, one of the things that I look forward to with each new season of an HBO show is who they're going to add to the cast because they always do such a good job. And again, we haven't even gotten into some of the other people. Like I said, we had the post-credit scene with Maeve. We didn't even get to see William, the Man in Black, in this episode. We saw one scene with Charlotte and what she's kind of doing with handling kind of the Delos people. I have a feeling that the creators of the show are not as interested in focusing on the Delos people for the remainder of the season. But the other thing, too, that I'm looking forward to is one of my favorite actors, that being Vincent Cassell, who portrays the villain in Ocean's 12, as well as Natalie Portman's ballet instructor in Black Swan, as kind of this new secretive tech head that's going to employ Maeve in order to kind of find Dolores and find out what she's up to, you know, kind of pitting these two who really haven't had that much interaction in the past. You know, Maeve always kind of had her own thing going on versus Dolores was always kind of in the direct conflict. But now they're going to set these two head on, you know, and we haven't even gotten into like what's happening with Bernard and kind of what's going on with his whole thing.
Yeah, no, I mean, so we can unpack that real quick before we get out of here because I've always liked the character of Bernard. He's sort of like even in my first two watches around, he was someone that I sort of clung to because once you find out he's an android, he still feels more human than android. I mean, he's something about his programming and how it's just so slightly different than everyone else's. I instantly fell in love with that character. So to sort of see him hiding out and sort of like living this like incognito lifestyle, I think they said he was down in the Philippines or something, just trying to lay low. Like, I really like that, man. And I think what I really, really liked was how they explored the technology with him. Like, system, are you lying to me? And he said, no. Like that. That's crazy to me. Like that, I never thought I would see that in a sci-fi world. So yeah, the character of Bernard, you know, he's been through a lot, but I feel like he's got some tricks up his sleeve this season, and I'm excited to sort of see him come more into the main storyline because I think it's pretty obvious he's going to get there. I'm just excited to see how he gets there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm like I said, I have no idea what's kind of going on. Kind of what they said they were going to do with his character was kind of kept vague because Dolores said it's like, yeah, I'm going to bring you back because you're always going to have to be around to stop me. You know, that line was a little vague, and it was getting into the line of like, you know, kind of hinting at divine intervention and destiny, you know, that Lost did so well. And I'm like, I don't know how much of a placement that has here in Westworld, but I like that he's still around. You know, I like Bernard. He's the heart of the entire show. And Jeffrey Wright does a tremendous job playing him. And like I said, just for interest to see where he's going to go on. Again, they hinted that, again, he is also going to be in direct conflict with Dolores, but it's kind of some other aspect. You know, they showed in the weeks to come teaser that he was going to be teaming up once again with the lesser Hemsworth that somehow managed to survive and is still in this show. I love all the secondary characters that they offed in the last season. Lesser Hemsworth, Luke Hemsworth, Chris and Liam's brother, is the one guy to stick around. So, but I'm glad that they kept those two guys back. And like I said, who knows what'll happen? You know, we still didn't see William in this episode, so we'll see how they're going to utilize him. They had a great twist at the end of last season where they showed hundreds of years in the future that he is now a host and getting like get tested with the Turing test, so I don't know if that's kind of like going to be like its own separate timeline and how they're going to interact. I don't know. I have no idea what they're going to do, and I'm very interested to see what they do with our returning favorite Westworld characters.
Yeah, real quick before we wrap it up here, I read a theory online, and I know these are dangerous, but it had some substantial sort of backbone to it, some back meat to it, if you will. And so basically, dude, like, what if this was a simulation inside of a simulation, and this whole season was just like a Flash Sideways type Lost style thing, and then it doesn't even count?
That is
like
a tricky thing.
Would you? Because I can see that the only reason I bring it up on the podcast, because I know that those theories are sort of silly, but this sort of doesn't seem like it's too outside of the realm of possibilities. You know what I'm saying? I
do, and I would be inclined to agree with you. The thing is that the only reason why I'll say no is because up until now, Westworld has proved that anything kind of sideways that it has, it always kind of comes back to and is tethered to reality. Westworld hasn't kind of experimented around yet with anything like that, especially given how kind of the introduction of like the system mainframe, which is where they ended up putting all of the hosts' consciousnesses, at the end of last season, was definitely a thing. And I think that they are still hinting at something similar to that. I think that kind of like that giant hub that you saw, that John Gallagher Jr. was showing Dolores in this episode, I'm wondering if that's going to have something to do with her trying to bring all of those androids' consciousness back from whatever kind of robot afterlife they went to in the next season. But for right now, I'm going to be inclined to disagree with you on that point, only because everything story-wise up until this point has been very tangential and set in the real world. And I think that they are still interested in kind of the effects of the androids on real life now, quite literally in humanistic form. So that's the only reason why I would be inclined to disagree with you on that point.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I was just asking you what you thought about that. My opinion on that subject is, I mean, I think it's pretty stupid. It's just that, like, I've seen that theory posted from a few different outlets who I sort of go to like, nerd out on the stuff I really, like, want to get deep with. And so I was like, okay, maybe there's something of note here. To me, I think it would really dilute and sort of like, just take away from the intricate web that they're so, I'd say, masterfully weaving with all the different storylines. And like how you said, it always comes back to reality. And I would be very upset if they did that. If it was like a last season of, I don't know if you finished Lost yet. I don't want to spoil it. Actually, did you finish the?
I have one episode left. I'm on the finale.
Okay, so all I'll say is if it has a similar sort of send off like Lost, well then I will feel like I wasted my time. But I don't think that's going to be the case. It's just that sort of seems to be like I always like asking. Those are fun, little fan theories where everyone.
Yeah, definitely. Those little like fan queries.
And I guess like the reason why I'm even bringing that up is because like this episode had me super engrossed. Where like the first thing I did when I woke up was like, okay, what are the Easter eggs? This episode for the first time with this show has me wanting to dive in and dissect more. And so with that being said, I mean, are you cool with doing some closing statements here?
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. So yeah, like, I kind of just said mine, like, I'm in, guys. I'm okay with everything I just saw. I think it was a long-winded way to get to where we are, but now that I sort of am able to, in hindsight, look back at those first two seasons, I wouldn't change anything. In fact, I think I probably appreciate them a little more because this feels like it was meant to be where we just ended off at the end of season 3, episode 1, and I'm along for the ride, man. I'm 100% locked in. I forget, do we give like the first episodes of shows a rating, or how do we?
I think so. Yeah, definitely. Kind of the comparison of the first episode to the finale once we cover it.
Yeah, okay, I'm going to give this a 4.5, and that's like the first 4.5 I think I'll give this show so far, but it's because I'm feeling super. I'm on board. I'm ready to go. So
definitely, yeah. This was a very fast-paced. This was a fun episode. This was a very engrossing episode in terms of doing everything that kind of pilots should do in terms of getting you re-engrossed, reintroduced to the world of the show, the characters, the settings, the conflicts, all the rich juicy storytelling bits that we have come to expect. I think this episode did everything that it needed to. Again, it's definitely a big change of pace, and it's one that I think kind of diehard fans of the show, if there even is such a thing now, are definitely going to have to get used to. But for my money, I enjoyed what I saw. I'm very interested to see where they go, because I enjoy the show, and I want to see where it goes, and I hope that it does have a worthwhile conclusion. I could also see this existing in a world where this ends up being the last season, but I think that's also going to depend heavily on how many people end up tuning into the show.
I wanted to ask you about that. Is this show at risk of coming to an end?
I think this season is going to be the determining season of whether the show has legs to stick it out more or whether this kind of ends, But again, that's a whole different discussion for
sure.
kind of the show longevity.
We'll save it for when we cover the finale of this episode.
Exactly, yeah. So with that being said, again, I very much enjoyed the performances all around were great. There were a few moments that I was like, okay, this is getting a little bit too simplistic for me, but for the most part, I enjoyed it. I'm going to give it 4 stars out of 5.
Cool. Seems like we're floating around similar territory.
Pretty much.
And I hope that when we give the finale of this episode, we can do it in person.
Yeah, hopefully.
God forbid we're still dealing with that.
Maybe this freaking quarantine will finally be over.
Yeah, you and me both, man. So, Dom, but with that being said, one thing that is not going to be over because of coronavirus, as we said, is our show. And so since a lot of people are going to have a lot of time to sort of find this show and hopefully, go back and listen to episodes that they maybe missed, where can they, do all that stuff and find out where to, look us up, Dom?
Well, as you guys know, we have a podcast. It's called Talkin TV. In case you guys didn't know, you can find us on any place that there is to listen to podcasts, that being on Anchor, which is, of course, a free distribution service that goes out to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Radio Public, Stitcher, Pocket Cast, Google Play, and every place else that you can listen to podcasts except for SoundCloud, because SoundCloud makes you pay for it. And and in terms of our social media page, you can find us across all social media platforms, Facebook and Instagram, and soon to be YouTube as well. Yes, that's right. We have YouTube videos coming up, kids, all under the same name, Talkin TV, no G, or Talkin TV Podcast.
Hell yeah. And you know what, guys? We're going to get YouTube up sooner than you thought we would, because guess what? We're freaking quarantined. So what else am I going to do but start exporting these videos? And I'm really looking forward to doing that. And on top of that, though, we're also kind of figuring out some other content to give to the YouTube channel as well, aside from just the episodes. So, bear with us. We have a lot more time now to plan, though, than we thought. So we're gonna try to make that YouTube ride a little bit more worth your while, guys. And so with that being said, something that I think is worth your while is if you follow us on the social medias. Dom, do you want to tell them where that is, or do you want me to do it?
I already told him, but I was going to say personals now.
Oh, personals. Yeah. Sorry, I was just, too busy thinking about quarantine, man. This podcast was a nice little escape, but now I'm back into full corona fear.
Yeah, so. Definitely. I'm full quarantine mode. Yeah, it's a tricky thing to think about.
No, but seriously, guys, stay safe out there, and follow Dom.
Wash your hands.
Please wash your hands. Stay safe. Don't go out in public, even if you're in a city or a state that hasn't locked down yet. Like, just be smart if you can help it. And Dom, they can follow you. You're pretty active on your Instagram and all that stuff, aren't you?
Yes, indeed. You can follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube across all platforms under my name, Movie Nerd Reviews.
Beautiful. And I also follow Dom, so trust me, guys, I only subscribe to premium content. And speaking of premium content, if you want to follow me on my Instagram, it's my first and last name, @Christian Evanko. Don't wear it out. I make music, I make many podcasts, and I'd love to have you guys join me there. I got a puppy, her name's Honey. I post a decent amount of pictures of her and also a lot of story posts about her. So, come and watch this little pup grow up, because it's been pretty magical. And there is something else that's pretty magical about this show, and I think that this message, there's never been a better time to sort of give this message, and God damn it, I say it all the time, but today I am especially thankful for the way we end this show. Dom, take it away. Is there a message you want to leave the people with here today on Talkin TV?
Well, in these times of quarantine, I guess since you really don't have anything else to do, I guess you really have, your only option is to watch more fucking movies, people. We out.